Elvis Presley lived a life of incredible highs and devastating lows. He was the king of rock and roll. Millions loved him. Oh, but behind the glitz and the fame, Elvis struggled. His health declined badly in his last years. People often blame his lifestyle. They point to his diet and drug use. And yes, those things played a big part. But what if there was more to it? What if something hidden, something deeper, was at play? Modern science gives us new ways to look at old problems. We can now study genetics in amazing detail. Genetic studies look at our DNA. They show us what we are predisposed to. They can point to tendencies for certain diseases. They can highlight vulnerabilities. So imagine this. What if we could look at Elvis's DNA today? What if we could run a series of genetic studies? What would they tell us? Many experts now believe that Elvis was predisposed to several health issues. These were not just bad habits catching up to him. These were likely genetic weaknesses. They made him more susceptible. They made his body break down faster. Think about it. Why did a man in his prime, with access to the best doctors, suffer so much? Why did he have so many different health problems all at once? His struggles range from severe constipation to heart issues, from chronic pain to mysterious rashes. And all of them contributed to his dependency on medication. It was a tragic spiral. These genetic predispositions didn't mean Elvis was doomed, but they meant he was fighting an uphill battle. They meant his body was more fragile in certain ways, and understanding this changes how we see his story. It adds a layer of empathy. It shows us that he might have been dealing with forces beyond his control, forces he and his doctors couldn't even dream of understanding back then. Here we will explore 15 areas where genetic studies suggest Elvis was predisposed to health issues. We'll look at how these hidden genetic factors might have shaped his life and how they might have contributed to his early death. So number 15, did a gene predispose Elvis to colonic dysfunction and megacolon? Elvis Presley had a lot of trouble with his gut. His doctors knew about his severe chronic constipation. This was not just a minor issue. It got very bad. Some reports say his colon was significantly enlarged. This condition is called megacolon. It can be very painful. It affects how your body processes food. And it was a big part of his health problems. Think about modern genetics. We now know that some people have genes that make them more likely to get certain gut problems. For example, some studies like those published in journals focused on gastroenterology show genetic links to slow motility. That means food moves too slowly through the digestive system. Researchers at places like the Mayo Clinic have identified genes that affect the nerves in the gut. These nerves control muscle contractions. If these genes have variations, they can lead to conditions like slow transit constipation. Well, Dr. William Davis, a gastroenterologist who has written about chronic gut issues, often discusses the interplay of diet, gut microbiome, and genetic factors. And for someone like Elvis, who suffered so much, it makes you wonder, could Elvis have carried a gene that made his colon not work right? His medical records, if fully analyzed through a genetic lens, might point to this. His symptoms were severe enough that some medical professionals at the time, like his physician Dr. George Nicopolis, noted the extreme nature of his constipation. Nicopolis sometimes referred to it as a form of lazy bowel, but this laziness could have a genetic root. For instance, specific genetic mutations in genes like RET or POX2B are sometimes associated with Hirschsprung's disease, a more severe form of megacolon often diagnosed in childhood. While Elvis didn't have classic Hirschsprung's milder genetic variations in pathways controlling gut nerve development or muscle function could still predispose someone to chronic, severe constipation and eventual megacolon in adulthood. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis's DNA focused on neurodevelopmental genes affecting the enteric nervous system might find such a predisposition. We know Elvis's diet was often high in processed foods, and this surely made things worse. But diet might have been an amplifier, not the sole cause. If his gut was already genetically wired to be slow, then a poor diet would just push it over the edge. It's like having a car with a weak engine. You can put good fuel in it, but it still won't perform like a strong engine. The symptoms were so bad that Nicopolis even considered a colectomy, a surgery, to remove part of the colon. This was a radical idea for a relatively young man. It shows the severity, and it makes the genetic link seem even more plausible. Our Dr. Roger E. Markwell, a medical historian, has often highlighted how severe and chronic conditions were often underdiagnosed for their underlying causes in the mid-20th century. Shocking questions. Why was this specific severe gut issue so overlooked as a primary cause of suffering? If Elvis had lived today, would a simple genetic test have changed his treatment plan dramatically? And how many other chronic painful conditions are we still treating symptomatically when a genetic cause could be addressed earlier? What other parts of his health were directly impacted by this constant gut distress? Number 14 was heart disease, an inevitable part of Elvis's genetic code. Elvis Presley's official cause of death was cardiac arrest. His heart stopped. But this wasn't a sudden, isolated event. Elvis had an enlarged heart, and he had heart problems for years leading up to his death. His autopsy revealed a significantly enlarged heart, a condition known as cardiomegaly. This is not normal for someone in their early 40s. Genetic studies today show strong links between family history and heart disease. There are specific genes that increase the risk of cardiomyopathy. That's a disease of the heart muscle. It makes the heart unable to pump blood well. Some genes, like those affecting structural proteins in the heart, e.g. MYH7 or TTN, can cause inherited cardiomyopathies. These conditions can lead to an enlarged heart. They can cause arrhythmias, which are irregular heartbeats. And Elvis experienced both. His irregular heartbeats were noted, and his heart was enlarged. Dr. Stephen B. Call, a cardiologist who has studied sudden cardiac death, often points to genetic predispositions. He notes how family history can be a powerful indicator. Elvis's mother, Gladys, died young at 46. She also had heart issues. This family history adds weight to the genetic argument. It suggests a pattern of heart vulnerability. Even without lifestyle factors, these genetic predispositions can be serious. They can make the heart work harder, they can weaken it over time. Elvis's demanding career, his weight fluctuations, and drug use certainly stressed his heart. But a genetically weaker heart would feel these stresses much more acutely. It would succumb faster. A hypothetical genetic study looking at genes related to cardiac muscle structure or function might have flagged Elvis as high risk. Imagine a genetic panel for inherited heart conditions, okay? Such a panel, available today, could test for many genes linked to heart enlargement and rhythm problems. It would likely have shown abnormalities for Elvis. This isn't about blaming genes for everything. It's about understanding the total picture. If Elvis had a genetic predisposition, then every other stressor was amplified. Every unhealthy choice had a bigger impact on his heart. His sudden death at 42 was tragic, but it might have been an endpoint of a genetically predetermined path worsened by his life choices. The shocking questions. How many more years could Elvis have lived if his genetic heart risks were known and managed? Did his mother's early death offer a clue that no one recognized at the time? Could early intervention for inherited heart conditions have completely changed his life trajectory? What other family members might have shared this genetic vulnerability without knowing it? Number 13, how much did genetics play a role in Elvis's liver damage? Elvis Presley's liver was under strain for years. His autopsy showed liver damage. This is often linked to drug use and alcohol, and Elvis certainly used many medications. He struggled with substance dependency, but what if his liver was already genetically vulnerable? What if it couldn't handle toxins as well as other people's livers? Our livers are amazing organs. They filter out toxins, they process drugs, but not all livers are created equal. Genetic studies show that certain genes affect how our bodies metabolize substances. These genes control enzymes in the liver. These enzymes break down drugs and toxins. For example, variations in genes like CYP450 enzymes can make some people slow metabolizers. That means their bodies take longer to process drugs. Drugs stay in their system longer. This can lead to higher levels of drugs in the body. It can cause more stress on the liver. Dr. Andrew Weil, a physician and author, often discusses individual variations in drug metabolism. He highlights how different people react to the same dose of medication. If Elvis had these genetic variations, his liver would have been working overtime. Even standard doses of medication could have been toxic to him. This vulnerability would make his drug dependency even more damaging. His liver would have suffered more than someone with a fast metabolizer gene profile. The research by pharmacogenomics experts, like those at the Pharmacogenomics Research Network, consistently shows how individual genetic makeup dictates drug response and toxicity. His doctors, like Dr. Nikopoulos, were trying to manage his many symptoms with medication, but they didn't have the tools to understand his individual drug metabolism profile. They couldn't know if his body processed drugs differently. If a genetic study had been done, it might have shown a liver that was less efficient. It might have shown a predisposition to drug-induced liver injury. This would have completely changed his treatment plan. It might have led to, lower doses or different medications entirely. So while his drug use was a major factor, his genetics might have set the stage. They might have made his liver particularly susceptible to damage. It's not an excuse for drug abuse, but it offers a deeper understanding of his physical struggle. It paints a picture of a man fighting against his own biology. Shocking questions. If his liver's genetic vulnerability was known, could his doctors have managed his pain and other symptoms with less toxic approaches? Did his unique metabolism inadvertently contribute to his dependency issues by making standard doses feel too strong or too weak? How many people today are struggling with drug side effects due to unknown genetic metabolic variations? Could Elvis's mother, Gladys, have had similar liver predispositions? At number 12, did a genetic marker make Elvis prone to glaucoma? Elvis Presley suffered from vision problems later in his life. He wore thick glasses. And there are reports of him having glaucoma. Glaucoma is a serious eye condition. It damages the optic nerve. It can lead to blindness. It is often linked to high pressure inside the eye. And while age and other health conditions can play a role, genetics are a strong factor. Genetic studies have identified many genes linked to glaucoma risk. These genes can affect the fluid drainage system in the eye. They can influence the strength of the optic nerve. Some common genes associated with primary open-angle glaucoma, the most common type, include MYOC, OPTN, and WDR36. People with variations in these genes have a higher chance of developing the condition. Research from institutions like the National Eye Institute constantly updates our understanding of these genetic links. Dr. John H. Fingert, an ophthalmologist and researcher, has done extensive work on the genetic basis of glaucoma. Elvis's eye issues were progressive. They got worse over time. This fits the pattern of many genetically linked forms of glaucoma. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis, focused on ocular disease genes, would likely have flagged him as high risk. This knowledge would have allowed for earlier, more aggressive treatment. Early detection is key with glaucoma. It can prevent significant vision loss. It's easy to dismiss vision problems as minor. But for a performer, clear sight is vital. It affects everything. Imagine the stress of performing with blurry, worsening vision. This would add to his overall burden. It might have contributed to his withdrawal and discomfort in public. And it would have added another layer to his complex medical picture. His drug use could have also worsened his glaucoma. Some medications can increase intraocular pressure, but the underlying predisposition would have been genetic. It's like having a foundation that's already cracked. Any stress on the building makes the cracks worse. For Elvis, his genetic predisposition made his eyes particularly vulnerable. This vulnerability would have been there even if he lived a perfectly healthy life. The shocking questions. If Elvis's glaucoma risk was known early, could his vision have been saved? How much did his failing eyesight contribute to his mental state and sense of isolation? Are there other unrecognized genetic links between glaucoma and his other health problems, perhaps related to vascular health? Could this have affected his balance or coordination? Number 11. Could a lipid metabolism gene explain Elvis's cholesterol problems? Elvis Presley struggled with his weight. He often had high cholesterol levels. His high cholesterol is a known risk factor for heart disease, and we've already talked about his heart problems. While diet and lifestyle certainly impact cholesterol, genetics play a huge role too. Some people are just wired to have higher cholesterol no matter what they eat. Genetic studies have identified genes that control how our bodies process fats and cholesterol. These are called lipid metabolism genes. For example, variations in genes like ApoA, PCSK9, or LDLER can significantly impact cholesterol levels. Some people have a genetic predisposition to familial hypercholesterolemia. This means they have very high cholesterol from birth. It runs in families. Researchers at the Framingham Heart Study have shown the powerful influence of genetics on lipid profiles over generations. Dr. Helen Hobbs, a leading researcher in lipid metabolism, has identified key genetic pathways that regulate cholesterol levels. If Elvis carried these types of genetic variations, his body would naturally produce and retain more cholesterol. Even if he ate a perfect diet, his cholesterol would likely still be higher than average. And with his known diet, which was often rich in saturated fats, this genetic predisposition would have been a double whammy. It would have accelerated the damage to his arteries and heart. Imagine a genetic study that profiled Elvis's lipid metabolism genes. It might have revealed a strong tendency for high cholesterol. This knowledge would have prompted aggressive management. It would have changed dietary advice. It would have emphasized specific medications earlier in his life. But in his time, such detailed genetic insights weren't available. His weight gain wasn't just about overeating. It was also about how his body processed what he ate. His genetic makeup might have made him prone to storing fat more easily. It might have made it harder for him to lose weight. This would have been incredibly frustrating for him. He was a dynamic performer. He relied on his physical presence. His changing body deeply affected him. So, while diet was a factor, genetic vulnerability to high cholesterol and weight gain likely made his struggle much harder. It was another hidden battle he was fighting within his own body. Shocking questions. If Elvis knew about a strong genetic predisposition to high cholesterol, would he have been more motivated to adhere to strict diets or medication? How much did this genetic factor contribute to his heart disease, separate from other causes? Could early genetic screening for lipid disorders prevent countless cases of premature heart disease today? What kind of emotional toll did this constant battle with his weight take on him, knowing it might have been partly out of his control? Number 10 was autoimmune disease waiting in Elvis's genes. Elvis Presley experienced a range of mysterious symptoms. These included chronic fatigue, skin rashes, and general inflammation. Some of his health issues, like the rash that sometimes affected his face and body, had doctors wondering, was it lupus or some other autoimmune condition? Autoimmune diseases happen when the body's immune system attacks its own healthy tissues. They are complex, and genetics play a huge role. There are many genes linked to autoimmune diseases. For example, the HLA gene complex is a major player. Variations in these genes can make someone more susceptible to conditions like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, or psoriasis. Studies in immunology, like those published in the Journal of Immunology, consistently show genetic associations with these complex disorders. Researchers at the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases, NIAMS, have made significant progress in identifying genetic markers for various autoimmune diseases. Dr. Betty Diamond, a lupus researcher, has highlighted the intricate genetic basis of these conditions. Elvis's mother, Gladys, also had a history of health issues, including what was sometimes described as a chronic illness. This could suggest a family predisposition to autoimmune conditions. If Elvis had genetic markers for an autoimmune disease, it would explain a lot. It would explain why he felt so tired. It would explain the rashes that puzzled his doctors. And it would explain general inflammation throughout his body. A hypothetical genetic study looking at his HLA complex and other immune-related genes might have revealed a strong predisposition. This knowledge could have led to earlier diagnosis. It could have led to treatments aimed at modulating his immune system. But in the 1970s, autoimmune diseases were much less understood. Genetic testing for them was non-existent. The drugs Elvis took for pain and anxiety could have also interacted with an underlying autoimmune condition. They could have masked symptoms, or they could have even worsened them. The constant battle with chronic inflammation would have worn him down. It would have made him feel unwell all the time. This feeling of being unwell without a clear diagnosis often leads to frustration and despair. So it's possible Elvis was fighting a hidden autoimmune battle, a battle his body was genetically programmed to fight. And it was a battle he fought largely undiagnosed and unacknowledged in its full scope. Shocking questions. If Elvis's doctors had known he had a genetic predisposition to an autoimmune disease, how would his treatment plan have changed? Could a targeted immune therapy have reduced his reliance on other medications? How many of his unexplained symptoms could be traced back to this underlying genetic vulnerability? Could his mother's vague health complaints have been an unexpressed autoimmune condition as well? Number 9. What genetic factor made Elvis susceptible to chronic pain? Elvis Presley lived with chronic pain. He had bad headaches. He had back pain. He had general aches and discomfort throughout his body. This constant pain was a major driver of his drug dependency. He sought relief, but why was he in so much pain? Beyond injuries or specific illnesses, some people are genetically more susceptible to chronic pain. Genetic studies have identified genes that influence pain perception. They affect how our brains process pain signals. For example, genes involved in neurotransmitter pathways, such as those related to opioid receptors, OPRM1, or catecholamine metabolism, COMT, can make some people more sensitive to pain. They can make them feel pain more intensely, and they can make them less responsive to standard pain relief. Research in pain genetics, conducted by groups like the International Association for the Study of Pain, constantly uncovers new genetic links. Dr. Clifford Wolf, a leading pain researcher, has highlighted the genetic component of chronic pain and individual differences in pain sensitivity. If Elvis carried these genetic variations, he would have experienced pain differently. He would have felt it more deeply. His body might have been less efficient at producing its own natural painkillers, like endorphins. This would make chronic conditions, like his severe constipation or inflammation, much more agonizing for him. It would explain his desperate search for relief. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis, focusing on pain sensitivity genes, would likely have shown markers for increased vulnerability. This knowledge would have offered a more compassionate understanding of his need for medication. It wouldn't justify drug abuse, but it would explain the underlying persistent suffering. It would put his struggle into a biological context. His demanding performance schedule also put a lot of stress on his body. He was constantly moving, he was performing with high energy. Any underlying musculoskeletal issues or inflammatory conditions would have been aggravated. And if he was genetically predisposed to feel that pain more intensely, it would have been a vicious cycle. The pain led to drugs, which led to other health problems, which led to more pain. So his chronic pain wasn't just psychological, it had a strong biological, possibly genetic component. This made his life a continuous battle against discomfort. Shocking questions: if Elvis's unique pain sensitivity was understood genetically, could alternative pain management strategies have been developed? How much did his constant physical pain contribute to his mental health struggles and feelings of isolation? Could early detection of such genetic predispositions help prevent dependency in other individuals today? What impact did his chronic pain have on his ability to perform and enjoy his life outside of the spotlight? Number 8. Did a sleep apnea gene contribute to Elvis's breathing issues? Elvis Presley struggled with his breathing. He snored loudly. He often looked tired. And sometimes he reportedly stopped breathing in his sleep. These are classic signs of sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a serious condition. It happens when breathing repeatedly stops and starts during sleep. It deprives the body of oxygen, and it puts a huge strain on the heart and other organs. While weight is a major risk factor, genetics also play a role. Genetic studies have identified genes linked to sleep apnea. These genes can influence airway structure. They can affect how the brain controls breathing during sleep. For example, variations in genes that control craniofacial development or muscle tone in the upper airway can predispose someone to sleep apnea. Some studies, like those in Sleep Journal, point to genetic heritability in obstructive sleep apnea. Researchers at institutions like Harvard Medical School have identified genetic markers associated with increased risk. Dr. Atul Malhotra, a sleep medicine specialist, has emphasized the genetic component in individuals with severe sleep apnea, even those without significant obesity. Elvis gained a lot of weight in his later years. This certainly would have worsened any sleep apnea. But if he had a genetic predisposition, the weight gain would have been an amplifier. It would have made a pre-existing vulnerability much more severe. His body shape, including his neck circumference, could have been influenced by genetics. And this could have made his airway more prone to collapse during sleep. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis focused on sleep-related genes and airway development might have revealed a strong predisposition. This knowledge could have led to earlier diagnosis and treatment. Treatments like CPAP machines were not widely available or understood in the 1970s. But if the genetic risk was known, doctors might have been more aggressive in exploring options. The constant lack of oxygen from sleep apnea would have affected every part of his body. It would have contributed to his fatigue, it would have put immense stress on his heart, and it would have exacerbated other health conditions like his high blood pressure and heart enlargement. This hidden struggle would have worn him down every single night. It would have prevented restorative sleep. So, while his weight was a factor, a genetic predisposition to sleep apnea might have been lurking. It could have been silently suffocating him every time he closed his eyes. Shocking questions: if Elvis's sleep apnea was diagnosed and treated early, would his heart health and overall vitality have improved dramatically? How much did this nightly oxygen deprivation contribute to his daytime fatigue and dependence on stimulants? Could a genetic link explain why some people develop severe sleep apnea while others with similar weight do not? What other organ systems were silently suffering from chronic oxygen deprivation due to undiagnosed sleep apnea? Number 7. How did genetics influence Elvis's vulnerability to drug addiction? Elvis Presley became dependent on various prescription drugs. This is a well-documented part of his story. His dependency was driven by chronic pain and a desire for relief, but genetics also play a significant role in addiction. Some people are just more vulnerable to developing dependency than others. It's not just a matter of willpower. Genetic studies have identified genes that influence reward pathways in the brain. They affect how our brains respond to pleasure and dopamine. For example, variations in genes related to dopamine receptors DRD2 or opioid receptors OPRM1 can make some individuals more susceptible to addiction. They might feel a stronger high from drugs, or they might feel a greater craving when drugs are absent. Research by institutions like the National Institute on Drug Abuse (NIDA) consistently demonstrates the genetic component of addiction susceptibility. And Dr. Nora Volkow, the director of NIDA, often speaks about how genetic factors can explain why some people get addicted and others don't, even with similar exposure. If Elvis carried these types of genetic variations, his body and brain would have been predisposed to addiction. The medications he took for pain and sleep would have had a more powerful, habit-forming effect on him. His brain might have quickly adapted. It might have developed a strong need for the drugs. This genetic predisposition would make his struggle with dependency even more tragic. It adds a layer of biological compulsion. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis focused on addiction susceptibility genes might have revealed these markers. This knowledge would have prompted a much different approach to his pain management. It would have emphasized non-addictive alternatives. It would have called for extreme caution with prescription opioids and sedatives. But in the 1970s, addiction was often seen purely as a moral failing. The complex genetic underpinnings were largely unknown. His personality, his life stresses, and his fame certainly contributed. But an underlying genetic vulnerability would have made him an easier target for dependency. It would have made it incredibly hard to break free. It's like having a house built on shaky ground. Any storm will cause more damage. For Elvis, his genetic makeup made him less resilient to the addictive nature of the drugs. The shocking questions, if Elvis's genetic predisposition to addiction was known, could his doctors have avoided prescribing highly addictive medications? How much did this genetic vulnerability exacerbate his health decline, making his battle with pain and sleep even harder? Are we still underestimating the role of genetics in addiction today, leading to less effective treatment approaches? Could this genetic vulnerability have extended to other compulsive behaviors in his life? Number 6 was an adrenal gland gene responsible for Elvis's stress response. Elvis Presley lived under immense pressure. He was constantly performing. He was always in the public eye, and his life was full of stress. His body showed signs of chronic stress. He developed what some doctors described as Cushingoid features. These include a round face and fat deposits around the neck and abdomen. These features are often linked to high levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, which is produced by the adrenal glands. Genetic studies have identified genes that influence adrenal function and the body's stress response. For example, variations in genes related to cortisol production or receptor sensitivity can make some people more prone to chronic stress effects. Conditions like familial Cushing syndrome, though rare, show how genetic factors can lead to adrenal overactivity. More subtle genetic variations can lead to a dysregulated stress response. Research in endocrinology from institutions like the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases (NIDCA) highlights the genetic control of the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which governs stress. Dr. Richard J. Auchus, an expert in adrenal disorders, often discusses the genetic components of steroid hormone synthesis and regulation. If Elvis had such genetic predispositions, his adrenal glands might have been working overtime. Even under normal stress, they might have produced too much cortisol, and under the extreme stress of his life, this would have been greatly amplified. This chronic excess of cortisol would have contributed to his weight gain. It would have affected his metabolism, and it would have weakened his immune system. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis focused on adrenal function genes and the HPA axis might have revealed abnormalities. This knowledge would have prompted investigations into his hormone levels earlier. It would have led to treatments aimed at regulating his stress response, but in his time, these genetic links were not understood. His symptoms were often attributed to his weight or medication side effects. His reliance on steroids for various ailments might have further complicated things. It's possible the steroids he took interacted with an already overactive adrenal system, pushing his body even further into a state of imbalance. This constant internal battle would have made him feel exhausted and unwell, even when trying to rest. So, while his lifestyle was stressful, his genes might have made his body uniquely ill-equipped to handle that stress. They might have turned his own stress hormones against him. Shocking questions. If Elvis's adrenal genetic vulnerability was known, could targeted therapies have mitigated his Cushingoid features and other stress-related symptoms? How much did this chronic stress response contribute to his overall physical and mental decline? Are we overlooking subtle genetic predispositions to stress dysregulation in many individuals today? Could this genetic tendency have also influenced his mood and anxiety levels? Number 5, could a thyroid gene have undermined Elvis's metabolism? Where Elvis Presley suffered from fatigue and weight gain, he had difficulty losing weight, and he often felt sluggish. These are classic symptoms of an underactive thyroid or hypothyroidism. The thyroid gland produces hormones that control metabolism. If it doesn't work well, everything slows down. While his lifestyle and medications could impact thyroid function, genetics often play a strong role in thyroid disorders. Genetic studies have identified genes that predispose individuals to thyroid conditions. These genes can affect thyroid hormone production. They can influence thyroid gland development, or they can lead to autoimmune thyroiditis like Hashimoto's disease, where the immune system attacks the thyroid. Common genetic markers, especially within the HLA complex, are linked to autoimmune thyroid conditions. Research by the American Thyroid Association has highlighted the significant genetic component in thyroid disorders. Dr. Anthony P. Wheatman, an expert in autoimmune thyroid disease, has extensively documented the genetic susceptibility. If Elvis had a genetic predisposition to hypothyroidism, it would explain many of his struggles. His metabolism would have been slower. This would make weight management much harder. It would contribute to his constant fatigue, and it would affect his energy levels, which were so crucial for his performances. His doctors did test his thyroid at times, but the full picture of genetic predisposition was missing. They might have treated the symptoms without addressing the underlying genetic vulnerability. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis, focused on thyroid-related genes, might have revealed such a predisposition. This knowledge would have allowed for earlier, more consistent monitoring and treatment of his thyroid function. It might have led to different dietary recommendations. It might have influenced his medication choices. Hypothyroidism can also impact mood, contributing to depression and anxiety. Given Elvis's documented struggles with these, an underlying thyroid issue could have been a contributing factor. It's another piece of the complex puzzle that explains his declining health. His genetic makeup might have made his thyroid particularly fragile, making it more susceptible to environmental stressors or illness. So, his fatigue and weight gain might not have been solely due to diet or drugs. They could have been rooted in a genetic predisposition that made his thyroid gland an Achilles heel. Shocking questions. If Elvis's genetic thyroid vulnerability was known early, could consistent thyroid hormone replacement have significantly improved his overall health and energy levels? How much did an undetected or undertreated thyroid condition contribute to his weight gain and feelings of despair? Are many people struggling with unexplained fatigue and weight issues today due to undiagnosed genetic thyroid predispositions? Could this genetic predisposition have been present in other family members going unrecognized? Number 4, did early onset diabetes genes affect Elvis's pancreas? Elvis Presley showed signs of insulin resistance. He often had high blood sugar, and he was overweight. These are all indicators of prediabetes or developing type 2 diabetes. While diet and weight are major factors, genetics play a very strong role in who gets diabetes and when. Some people are genetically wired for their pancreas to struggle with insulin production or for their cells to be resistant to insulin. Genetic studies have identified many genes linked to type 2 diabetes. These genes can affect how the body produces insulin. They can influence how cells respond to insulin, or they can impact glucose metabolism. For example, variations in genes like TCF7L2, KCNJ11, or CAPN10 are well-known risk factors for type 2 diabetes. Research from large-scale studies like those from the Diabetes Genetics Initiative continually identifies new genetic associations. Dr. C. Ronald Kahn, a leading diabetes researcher, has done extensive work on the genetic and molecular basis of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. If Elvis carried these types of genetic variations, his body would have been predisposed to insulin resistance. His pancreas would have had to work much harder to control his blood sugar. And with his known diet, which included many sugary and high carbohydrate foods, this genetic vulnerability would have been severely tested. It would have pushed his system toward prediabetes and eventually likely full-blown type 2 diabetes. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis focused on diabetes-related genes might have revealed a strong predisposition. This knowledge would have allowed for much earlier and more aggressive interventions. It would have emphasized strict dietary control. It might have led to medications to improve insulin sensitivity. But in the 1970s, the genetic links to diabetes were not well understood. Treatment focused mostly on managing symptoms once the disease was fully established. Untreated or poorly managed blood sugar problems contribute to many other health issues. They damage blood vessels, they increase the risk of heart disease, they can affect nerve function, and they can worsen kidney and eye problems. Given Elvis's heart and eye issues, a hidden struggle with glucose regulation could have been a silent accelerant to his overall decline. So his battle with blood sugar was likely not just about his love for junk food. It was probably rooted in a genetic predisposition that made his body struggle with glucose, regardless of diet. Shocking questions. If Elvis's genetic predisposition to diabetes was known, could an early and aggressive management plan have prevented or delayed the onset of the disease and its complications? How much did his fluctuating blood sugar contribute to his fatigue and mood swings? Are we still underestimating the genetic component of type 2 diabetes, focusing too much on lifestyle alone? Could this genetic vulnerability explain why he struggled with weight gain more than others? Number 3, what role did genes play in Elvis's emotional volatility? Elvis Presley was known for his charisma, but he also had significant emotional struggles. He experienced mood swings. He battled depression and anxiety. He could be prone to outbursts. While the pressures of fame and personal losses certainly contributed, genetics can also play a role in emotional regulation and mental health. Some people are genetically more predisposed to certain mood disorders. Genetic studies have identified genes that influence neurotransmitter systems in the brain. These systems control mood, emotions, and stress responses. For example, variations in genes related to serotonin transport SLC6A4, dopamine regulation, or GABAergic signaling can affect an individual's vulnerability to depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder. Research in psychiatric genetics by institutions like the Broad Institute continually identifies new genetic loci associated with mood disorders. Dr. Kenneth S. Kendler, a leading researcher in psychiatric genetics, has done extensive work on the heritability and genetic architecture of major depressive disorder and other psychiatric conditions. If Elvis carried these types of genetic variations, his brain chemistry might have been less stable. He might have been more prone to intense emotional swings. The stresses of his life would have hit him harder emotionally. This genetic vulnerability would make his struggles with depression and anxiety even more profound. It adds a biological explanation to his internal turmoil. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis, focused on genes related to neurochemistry and emotional regulation, might have revealed these predispositions. This knowledge could have led to different therapeutic approaches. It might have guided medication choices for his mood. It might have emphasized talk therapy or stress management techniques tailored to his genetic profile. But in the 1970s, mental health was stigmatized, and genetic insights were decades away. His drug use also played a role here. Many of the sedatives and stimulants he took can impact brain chemistry. They can create artificial highs and devastating lows. For someone with a genetic predisposition to mood instability, these drugs would have been particularly dangerous. They could have exacerbated his underlying vulnerabilities, making his emotional roller coaster even more extreme. So his emotional volatility wasn't just about his life circumstances. It was likely rooted in a genetic makeup that made him more susceptible to mood disorders. It was another unseen battle within him. Shocking questions. If Elvis's genetic predisposition to mood disorders was known, could specific psychiatric treatments have offered him greater stability and peace? How much did his untreated or mismanaged emotional struggles contribute to his overall health decline and drug dependency? Are we still underestimating the biological basis of mood disorders, focusing too much on external factors? Could this genetic predisposition have been inherited from his mother or other family members, explaining familial patterns of emotional challenges? Number 2 was psoriasis, or skin condition predisposition in Elvis's family tree. Elvis Presley suffered from various skin issues. He had a chronic skin rash. Some reports described it as a lupus-like rash. This affected his face and body, and it was a source of discomfort and self-consciousness. While some skin conditions can be caused by allergies or infections, many chronic skin diseases like psoriasis or eczema have strong genetic links. Genetic studies have identified genes that influence immune responses in the skin. They affect skin barrier function. For example, variations in genes like HLA-CoB6 are strongly associated with psoriasis. Genes related to the epidermal barrier like FLG filaggrin are linked to eczema. Other genes involved in the immune system's inflammatory pathways are also implicated in various chronic skin conditions. Research in dermatogenetics, published in journals like the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, consistently identifies genetic susceptibility to these conditions. Dr. Ann Bocock, a researcher focusing on the genetics of psoriasis, has significantly advanced our understanding of its inherited basis. If Elvis had genetic markers for a condition like psoriasis or another inflammatory dermatosis, it would explain his persistent rash. It would explain the discomfort, and it would explain why it was difficult to treat. His doctors struggled to find a definitive diagnosis, and they struggled to find effective, lasting treatments for his skin problems. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis, focused on skin disease genes and immune system markers, might have revealed such a predisposition. This knowledge could have led to more targeted therapies. It might have involved specific immune-modulating drugs. Or it might have led to different skincare regimens, but in his era, the genetic basis of these conditions was largely unknown. Treatments were often symptomatic and less effective. The chronic nature of his skin issues would have added to his overall stress. For a public figure, appearance is important. A persistent, unexplained rash would have been both physically uncomfortable and emotionally distressing. It could have impacted his self-esteem, and it could have contributed to his desire for more privacy. So his skin problems were likely not just superficial. They were probably rooted in a genetic predisposition that made his skin or immune system particularly reactive. Shocking questions. If Elvis's genetic predisposition to a chronic inflammatory skin condition was known, could targeted treatments have cleared his skin and improved his quality of life? How much did his persistent skin issues contribute to his mental stress and withdrawal from public life? Are we still underestimating the genetic complexity of chronic skin diseases, leading to suboptimal treatments? Could other family members have suffered from similar undiagnosed skin conditions? Number 1. How did a unique mitochondrial disorder possibly shape Elvis's entire health trajectory? This is a bigger idea. It tries to connect many of Elvis's seemingly unrelated health problems. What if Elvis had a mild, undiagnosed mitochondrial disorder? Mitochondrial disorders are complex. They affect the mitochondria. These are the powerhouses of our cells. They produce energy. If mitochondria don't work right, it can affect almost any organ system. It can cause a wide range of symptoms. And these symptoms can mimic many common diseases. Genetic studies on mitochondrial DNA and nuclear genes involved in mitochondrial function have exploded in recent decades. These studies show how subtle defects in energy production can lead to multi-system illness. For example, mutations in genes encoding mitochondrial proteins can lead to fatigue, muscle weakness, heart problems, gut issues, neurological problems, and even endocrine dysfunction. The researchers at the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, UMDF, and institutions like Columbia University Medical Center are at the forefront of identifying these complex genetic conditions. Dr. Salvatore Damaro, a pioneer in mitochondrial medicine, has highlighted how these disorders can present with incredibly varied symptoms, often mimicking other common illnesses. Consider Elvis's wide array of symptoms: chronic fatigue, heart enlargement, gut motility issues, megacolon, fluctuating blood sugar, chronic pain, and possible neurological or endocrine imbalances. A mitochondrial disorder could be the unifying thread. His body's cells might have been chronically underpowered. This would make every organ system vulnerable. It would make it harder for his body to recover from stress, illness, or drug exposure. If Elvis had a genetic predisposition to a mitochondrial disorder, even a mild one, it would explain why he seemed to age faster. It would explain why he broke down in so many different ways. It would explain why he constantly felt unwell. The condition would have been there from birth. It would have subtly, or not so subtly, undermined his health his entire life. A hypothetical genetic study on Elvis, looking at both his mitochondrial DNA and nuclear genes involved in mitochondrial biogenesis and function, might have revealed such a subtle defect. This knowledge would have completely changed his medical care. It would have focused on supportive therapies. It would have emphasized energy conservation. It would have avoided medications that could further stress his mitochondria. But in the 1970s, mitochondrial medicine was in its infancy. Such a diagnosis would have been impossible. This theory doesn't negate the impact of his lifestyle, but it suggests a powerful underlying vulnerability. It suggests his body was fighting a fundamental energy crisis, a crisis that made him incredibly fragile. It makes his story even more poignant. He was fighting a war inside his own cells without knowing it. Shocking questions. If a subtle mitochondrial disorder was diagnosed in Elvis, would it have reframed his entire medical history and led to drastically different treatment? Could this single genetic vulnerability explain the broad spectrum of his physical and mental health challenges? How many people today are struggling with undiagnosed mild mitochondrial disorders leading to chronic, seemingly unrelated symptoms? Could Elvis's mother Gladys have suffered from similar, if less severe, energy deficits due to shared genetic mitochondrial variations? What impact might this chronic energy depletion have had on his immune system and overall resilience to illness?